Thanks so much for coming. My name's Dave Treat. I lead Accenture's blockchain business. It's actually blockchain and multi-party systems business. And part of our focus and part of the business that we've been building, really has had at its core the transformation of large-scale ecosystems. And at the heart of it, there have really been two key gaps that we've been focused on now for a few years and making significant investments in. One of which you may have seen, we've had a focus throughout the past week around work that we're doing around central bank digital currency. The other one, and the focus of tonight, is really the other, which is digital identity. So we've been, and Accenture's been at the heart of this, we've been working to modernize ecosystems and work with our partners to drive forward digital businesses. But when I reflect on what's happened over the past couple of decades, we've largely been making things faster and more automated. We haven't been able to really, in many instances, truly transform the way that we work. And one of the key building blocks to be able to do that is the notion of digital identity. When we think about the digital world that has emerged, we're really using analog identity, information and products, right? We're pulling things out of our wallet. When I registered for my kids to go to school, I had to find a utility bill. I had to find a copy of the deed to my mortgage. It's a shoebox collection of things that really represent the totality of our identity. If you think from a financial services perspective, there are roughly 84 data elements in a KYC process. And if any of you have gone through this for yourselves or for your organization, it's an exercise in faxing and email. And we really just have had this gap in the way that we think about our identities in context with the digital world that we're building. I think the other thing that's really important to recognize is that the direction of travel from a regulatory perspective, from a social expectations perspective, is that I think we're very much done as a group with the data hack, data theft, identity theft. Certainly with GDPR and California privacy, we have a growing expectation of control over our identity information and how it gets applied and how it gets used. And so at the widest possible level, the notion of a winning digital business in the current period or the prior and current period has been the business that can accumulate the access to the most possible data by whatever means, some of it derived, some of it bought, purchased, some of it gleaned from network visibility, et cetera, and then to run machine learning algorithms and AI to create personalized services, but it's off of derived data very frequently. I think in the next period, based on an emerging set of technologies, we're going, and against these expectations, we're now entering into a period where the winning digital business is the one that can create the most trusted relationship with its customer or business counterparty. And then through that customer, that trusted relationship, be able to have direct access to actual data. And so we've been a partner with the World Economic Forum around what does good digital identity look like. I'm thrilled. I'll introduce the panel in a second, but we're going to talk to some of not just the work around defining what does good digital identity look like, but also a real phenomenal first effort to implement it, a partnership between Canada, the Netherlands, Schiphol Airport, Toronto, Montreal Airport, KLM Airlines, Air Canada, product partners like VisionBox and the like, to be able to apply this emerging notion of self-managed identity for very valuable, practical business outcomes. And I'm looking forward to the panel where we'll talk that through. From a confidence perspective, I think we're very early in the cycle, and I'm thrilled to see so many faces, the right folks in the room here, to have the group dialogue around how does this need to evolve. We will be no better off if every company basically develops their own identity solution and we move from one siloed environment to another. We will be far better off when what is actually happening, we're putting the users at the heart of it. We're creating a self-managed identity construct, and we're able to have that portability, that interoperability, that ability to take your actual identity information, transcend contexts, and apply it valuably. And we've got a phenomenal panel this evening to talk through all of these concepts, the potential, the trajectory of travel. Actually, one point I want to make, Brian, you caught out of the corner of my eye, Brian caught me. Another key element of the confidence is I'm incredibly enthused that we have open source platforms implementing or giving us the ability to implement common capability off of, in this instance, Hyperledger Indy. Indy will give way over time to Aries, but to be able to have at the heart of this technical platforms in early versions, but versions that are ready to use, the dialogue that's going on or from a governance and policy perspective around how to apply them. We really have all of the ingredients. The missing part, and I think part of what we're going to talk about through the course of this evening, is how do we, as a collection of corporate, enterprise, governments, NGOs, increase the dialogue as how we collaborate to drive effective digital identity on behalf of consumers and business partners across our ecosystems and not perpetuate the redundant siloed systems. So I spoke much longer than I intended to. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm very fired up about this whole space. I'm also very fired up about the panel that we've assembled for this evening's discussion. So we have Jim Shaughnessy, who's the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs for Workday, major partner and an organization that's very active in the digital identity space with some exciting things announced. And I won't steal any of your punchlines. We have Manju George, who is our partner from the World Economic Forum, who's the head of platform services in the digital economy and society. We've been partnering with Manju and Derek and team for the past couple of years, and very excited to have Manju with us. Thank you, Manju. We have Richard Kemon, head of business development for VisionBox, one of our partners from a product perspective. Worked together for years with respect to the actual facial recognition and other technologies that can be applied to support the use of digital identity, and a key partner in our known Traveler Digital Identity Program. We have Tara Nathan, who's the Executive Vice President for Public and Private Partnerships for MasterCard. Again, a longstanding partner and friend in this space, and hugely focused on digital identity and the suite of MasterCard innovations and efforts to apply it not just in a social and humanitarian impact space, but also for the customer base broadly. And then one of my favorite people in the world is going to I'm really going to embarrass her. One of my favorite people, Christine Leong, leads all of our digital identity work globally, has amassed an amazing team. We have Dan Backenheimer here in the room, who's also driving a lot of the standards in this space, sits on ISO and NIST and IEEE, and is the official biometrics representative to bridge between biometrics and blockchain. And so she's amassed a phenomenal team. Christine's going to lead us and moderate this panel, and I'm going to shut up because these are really the important people we want to hear from. So please welcome everyone. These are friends and partners, and I'm really looking forward to an engaging panel discussion and then drinks afterwards to go even deeper. So thank you. Thanks for coming. Christine, over to you.
So thank you, Dave, and good evening, everyone, and thank you, panelists, for being here. So identity. Often, this endless use cases, I often start with the fact that, 5-6 years ago, would any one of us get into a stranger's car? Probably not, right? We do it all the time now. Some of us get worried, and there are certain, of course, incidences, but identity is ubiquitous. But at the same time, it's not broken. It's required in every transaction. Who are you? Are you really who you say you are? In a digital world, it's hard to tell. Is it really you? Is it really Manju? Is it really Tara? Or is it, the classic cartoon, or, on the internet, no one knows that you are a dog. That sort of classic cartoon. So, yet, because it's not broken, there's a lot of, it's as old as Flintstones. So why is this important? Why are we even talking about this? So to each of you, why is digital identity important to you as an organization? What is your perspective? And why is this important? Why are you guys investing into this space? So let's start with Jim, and then we'll go in order. Sorry.
Thank you. I don't know how many of you know very much about Workday, and I'll tell you just a little bit. I sometimes get carried away with this story, but we are a leading provider of human capital management, financial management software for large enterprises. And although we're only 15 years old, we've grown very rapidly. And with our approximately 3,000 customers, we manage the records of about 40 million workers globally. And we are in a position to see a lot of what's going on in the workforce. And we, because of the changes driven by automation and machine learning, there is a significant attribute, which is there's a skills gap that employers have trouble finding people to fill the jobs that they have available, while workers are at risk of having their jobs change very, very rapidly. And so we see the economy moving towards skills-based hiring practices. So, but that creates there are a number of aspects of this. How do you acquire skills? How do you know which skills need to be acquired? But a big problem, which really relates to digital identity, is how do you prove out your skills? How do you establish that you have skills? And how do you credentialize skills? And so we started a project a couple of years ago to solve that problem. And it turns out the problem is really a three-sided market. That at the center are people who own credentials for their skills. And then there are people who use them, and there are people who issue them. And sometimes the people who issue them and use them are the same people. If you're an employer, you want to know that the person has the minimum skills or certifications necessary for a job. If you are, but if also you're an employer, you may be issuing and providing skills to people. So we look for a way to provide a digital identity solution for this particular problem that would be secure, that would be have skills that are verifiable, and that would be self-sovereign, so that individuals would own their skills and have the ability to decide which credentials to share with whom and when. And so we view this as a big part of the value that we provide our customers, but there's a broader social value in that it will sort of increase the velocity of labor market transactions, which will help people deal with the changing world of work.
Yeah. So we're focused on this for two reasons. One, because it's a very important part of our digital future, and two, because we think we haven't quite gotten it right. So on the first point, then, it's something that's important to every stakeholder that's represented in the Forum network. If I think about the 1 billion people who do not have access to any form of identity, they're cut off from the digital economy that we're trying to advance. For the people who are connected and have proofs of identity, even for them today, the digital interactions are less convenient, cumbersome, etc. So, and the questions that Dave raised in the beginning around trust, privacy, all of those concerns are still out there and not addressed. So finding the right solutions and sort of thinking of identity in the right way is important, and that's one of the reasons why we're focused on. The reason why we think we haven't gotten it right, some of it I articulated already, and the big gap or barrier that we see is lack of collaboration between the various stakeholders who should be working together to find that solution and moving it forward, keeping the individual in the middle, be it the customer or the patient or the traveler. So for us at the Forum, with a diverse network of multi-stakeholders, it becomes a topic that we should focus on, because we can help shape that. So that's why we are focused on it, and a number of colleagues who are present here as well have been trying to bring more visibility for the topic, bring different people together to understand what the shared problems are that we could potentially intervene in. Also starting to test some of the solutions, and I'd let other panelists speak more to some of the examples, like the non-traveler digital identity, which we are very keen to support and sort of help provide a space for. Let me stop there. And
So why is digital identity important for us as Fisherbox? We are basically, let's say, a technology company that is founded around biometrics. And in 2006, because we are talking about digital identity, actually, when the e-passport was introduced, people were carrying their own digital identity on their passport on a chip. And we started leveraging that to automate border clearance. So for us, digital identity means, let's say, facilitation and also security. So how can we improve society with this digital identity in a privacy by design manner? So with respect for the privacy of the individual, And like you say, it's all about the citizen centricity. So basically, how can we ease the life of citizens by feeding digital identity into their daily life? And we do that nowadays, in a program like KTDI, where we deploy it in an aviation sector, where it's travel. So the question is, how many times do you have to prove that you are you? Which you normally do, if you travel nowadays, you probably do it like 5-6 times for one journey. So we're solving that little step now, and then of course expanding that across other areas as well.
Hi, good evening. So I'm with MasterCard, and why is digital identity important to us? I think it's because we're an identity company. If I think about who we are, we've been in business for 50 years, but we're in the business of financial identity. So for us, identity really means access to services. In our core traditional business, that has always meant access to financial services. And that's what it's meant. When we break down what identity is, it's things like secure authentication, secure identification, and then there's a form factor, and then there's a credential, and there are various sort of elements along the identity, if you will, value chain. We've played along those. But our key role is really in driving interoperability. So for us, it's ensuring interoperability of all the different ecosystem partners in the identity value chain. I'd say as we've evolved, whereas we maybe started out purely in the financial services space, now we see ourselves more broadly in how we can play a role in interoperability of identity and any access to services. My business specifically, so it's a little bit of an outdated title, but it's fine. I actually run a social impact business within MasterCard called Humanitarian and Development. And so what it is it's a dual mandate. I have a development objective. That development objective is to leverage digital technology to extend critical services to people living in marginalized communities. And the fundamental way that we do that is through a digital identity. So for us, it's all about, as I said, access to critical services. In this context of living at what some have called the base of the pyramid or in marginalized communities, I think maybe there aren't others on the panel who sort of think about it from that lens. For us, it's really about thinking when we talk about the billion or so people who don't have access to any form of identity. There's another, 3 billion odd, 3.4 billion people who may have some form of identity but lack the ability either through digital credentials or other credentials to actually access services. So that means critical healthcare, that means education, that means markets, that means, critical things that everybody else takes for granted. And so my business is all about innovating solutions that drive access for those marginalized communities.
Thank you. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And some of you have heard this, that in payments, if I get from payments to workspace to travel, all of this, for those that actually have some form of identity, and I say this quite often when I speak, I always use myself as an example, right? And Manju's smiling because she heard me say this before. I moved from the UK to the US 5 years ago. I was born in Hong Kong. It took me 3.5 months to open a bank account. Can't get any credit. In the first place, I moved towards Texas, and you can't live in Texas without a car. So what do? I mean, you have no credit. I'm on medication for life. I couldn't get medication once I moved. I had to fly home because no one believed my medical health records. I clearly have a job. I couldn't get paid because I have no bank accounts. So what am I supposed to do? And for someone like myself who's relatively well educated, have a relatively decent job, and
relatively, Dave.
Relatively, yeah. What is it like for other people? So, and as a consultant, I have to fill in a lot of background check, and I travel a lot. I live basically on the plane, so travel, paying for things, ability to have financial inclusion, ability to do my background check every time I go to my client. and most of the time I get compliance issues because I forgot to fill it in all the forms. My degree hasn't changed in the last 20 years. I don't think it's going to change in another 20 years. So how can we make that easier? So whilst it's not completely broken, I can still get through an airport, but have to queue for a long time while I can still get a job. Definitely is a challenge. So what do you think, at least on a selfish level, I think identity is critical to get right so that I don't have to queue so long in the airport. I can get a job, I can get paid, I can go and do all of the normal things that I need to do on a daily basis. What do you think are the critical things that we need to get right? So we'll start again in the same order.
Okay.
Good.
So, interoperability is key, and therefore standards are key, that we really need to develop, in our case, it's standards for credentials so that all issuers can issue credentials can be used by any credential platform. And there's work being done now. There's more work that could be done. This is a major area of emphasis for us.
Well, I would just underline interoperability and perhaps also add, I think we need to shift that mental model of owning a customer's identity is the source of competitive advantage, right? That's not the only source of competitive advantage. How can we build more shared models, shared infrastructure, et cetera, and find value creation opportunities on top of that? So especially from a business standpoint, I think that mental model needs to shift for that interoperability to happen, because otherwise, we have a lot of silos and more silos are being created, and that's not helping anybody.
Actually, I agree with the two people on the right. But I think one of our drivers is that if you travel or if you move, or you have a lot of stakeholders that you need to give information, and that's what's happening. Every stakeholder builds up their own information position and only trusts their own information. And that's where you need standards, interoperability, but you also need trust. So how can I trust this identity? And how can I find a partner in the ecosystem that's most trustworthy for establishing, for example, an identity? Another might be more trustworthy for establishing other data. And together, you can actually improve. And that's, I think, the collaboration in an ecosystem, not looking indeed in like competitive advantage and data ownership, but in leveraging the data to be truly, in my eyes, customer-centric, which is not company-centric, it's customer-centric. Yeah.
Well, it would be just damn boring if I said interoperability. But I mean, as I said, for us, that's clearly our business. So to me, interoperability is key. But let's just put that aside. I think if I add on top of that, I would say it's around the data privacy, data security issue. The issues, right? Starting with things like, GDPR and customer centricity and customer permissioning, and sort of how are we going to tackle all this together as a community, I think is very important and something that we think about long and hard at MasterCard. When we think about biometrics data, for us, it's a lot about safely, securely capture, storage, and management of that biometric identity via tokenization. How do you then leverage that tokenization and enable interoperability is something we think a lot about. So if I added on top of interoperability, I would say the issues of safety and privacy. Security.
Thank you. It's actually leading to my sort of next point in terms of the risk of sort of getting it wrong. I mean, of course, security, privacy are critical aspects, and we hear about data breaches, violation, a lot of concerns about the different technologies that are out there, and more the responsible use of technology. What do you think are some of those challenges that we all need to come together to work to get it right? And what are the risk of getting it wrong? What do you think bad things will happen? What are some of the bad things that you can foresee of getting it wrong if we don't get identity right properly? So, same order to make my life easier.
For us, self-sovereignty is really important. We do believe that individuals should control their credentials and control with whom they're shared, and I think that you can generalize that to aspects of identity that people will decide with with whom to share. And if we don't get that right, if we enhance digital identity but individuals don't have control over it, then we could see some negative consequences, that social consequences I don't think we'd like very much.
I think trust in businesses, governments that people have, citizens or consumers have, would be broken if we don't get it right. I also, on the negative consequences, if the customer doesn't have control and if we don't address some of the privacy and other challenges that were outlined before, I could think of many instances where that data would be used against me, I would be discriminated against, in so many instances, right? And that doesn't lead to a cohesive society. So I think trust and some of those negative consequences that could be possibilities.
And I think with digital identity, like I just said, it started with a passport. So we do a lot of countries in Europe, passport control automated. So getting it wrong is not really an option. So you need to find a way, a balance, that you know that you will not always be right. So it means that you need to have fallback mechanisms. And that can be for the citizen. So how can I opt out, GDPR? Or how can I provide more context? So do I only rely on one check of a digital identity? Or do I create a broader context to basically verify? And I think that's the balancing act that we are doing. And that then builds trust in the ecosystem of digital identity.
I think for the populations that my business serves, the cost of getting it wrong is a little bit different, right? So I agree with you that for me, it's a little irritating when I have to pull out my passport and my plane ticket for the 5th time when I'm trying to get on a plane. That's irritating. It's very different when you're talking in a marginalized community context. It literally means that people don't go to school. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the communities that I serve, you have to make sure that your school fees are paid in order to take exam, in order to matriculate, in order to pass your test, in order for your child to actually graduate. You have to make sure that the school fee is paid. Well, for the average person who's living on $2 a day, that school fee of 50 cents is prohibitive. And so what they have to do is they make very small micropayments on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. So to ask about that question of what's the consequence, it's kids not going to school, it's girls not in school, it's people not getting vaccinated, it's people not eating, it's children not getting, school meals. So the identity is a core aspect of that. It's not just inconvenience. It's really about access to, critical services. And in some cases, it's life-saving humanitarian aid.
And that's a great point in terms of, but identity is often cited and is as something, yes, there's all this risk of getting it wrong. We need it to cross borders. We need it to have access to some of those essential services, to get a job, to make sure that we are hired for the right skills, and especially with sort of the gig economy, making sure that they're the right people and all of that. But at the same time, it's often cited as extremely expensive. That's why governments, issue the passports. And so what are then the right set of incentives that we need organizations, how can we get organizations to do this right? What do you think are some of the incentives and opportunities and business drivers for them to go and get this right? And I'll go in the same order.
No.
You can reverse order. I think that it is right. It's sort of figuring out how to structure the incentives to both encourage sort of participants to cooperate on standards for interoperability and then accelerate adoption because it's something that is will become increasingly important. We can all talk about the needs and while I think our use cases are very needy, yours are much needier, right? So it's important that we act with dispatch, but it's important that, as we said, we get it right on standards and interoperability as well. So I think it is about creating incentives for the various levels of participants. In our case, it's credential issuers, credential users, and then individuals to use it. But but there are other users who would need to, participants in the system would need to be incentivized to participate as well.
I also think first off, digital identity often means different things to different people. I don't think often it's a very well understood concept to begin with. So perhaps something needs to be done about that in the first place. And then the value of identity to the different stakeholders has not probably been well articulated for business. What are some of the value creation opportunities in the future? I think that business case, we can still do more to make that strongly, and the case for collaboration in getting to that, to realize that value. So I think, yeah, just making the concept more understood, particularly within businesses. I think it's not elevated yet as core to business strategy, as core to business growth. Not the case in every company, but in many companies, it is still seen as a technology topic or concept, as opposed to something that's core to the future of customer experience or the future of their strategy, their growth plans, future of ensuring trust in society as a source of competitive advantage, etc. So I think it needs to change.
Yeah, I agree. So like I just said, it should be about customer centricity. That's where the value creation is. And that can be commercially, or it can be also social-wise. So how can you better serve society by knowing, on one hand, who is who? On the other hand, by knowing, if you have a digital identity, you can also approach those people or those customers with suggestions. So you can much more tailor your offerings towards the specific identity, and that can be a commercial activity or let's say more from an aid perspective. So I think it's all about, like you say, it's not about the technology. There's a lot of definitions that need to be aligned. But it's mainly about how do I really become, I always call customer-centric or citizen-centric, instead of company-centric or process-centric. That's what we focus on a lot. But that's for me the value of identity.
I think in our case, as we think about serving marginalized communities, for us, cost is the number one concern. Because obviously when you're dealing with, if you're dealing with us, the cost to acquire me and acquire my Citibank relationship, you can spend a lot. You can spend a lot to acquire me because I spend a lot on my credit card. When you're talking about somebody who lives on $2 a day, cost to acquire, cost to maintain becomes very, very critical. So a big part of the business that I run is about the technology. There's a part which is about building the technology, the digital identity, the multi-wallet, the point of interaction sort of infrastructure that operates interoperably. But a big part of it is the commercial business model. And for us, this is a concept we call Community Pass. Community Pass is about creating a single digital identity or single digital infrastructure that enables us to push the cost off onto multiple use cases, because we know it's not cost effective enough, or it's cost prohibitive, I should say, to just issue an ID for the healthcare use case, or just an ID for the school use case, or just an ID to get your humanitarian aid. It is cost prohibitive and it's not sustainable or scalable. So we've spent a whole lot of energy and effort, to answer your question, in figuring out how do we create an interoperable, not just technology, but commercial model that enables these communities to leverage this infrastructure so that it is sustainable, scalable, and that we can acquire, maintain, manage, and proliferate services to the communities.
I think that last point around sort of the commercial model, the interoperability, trust, all of those things, the value creation, the customer centricity rather than company centricity, are all points that apply, across the board, especially in the marginalized community. But I think no less in the sort of developed world, where we also need those the right set of incentives, probably different set of incentives, but and different things, but and different levels. But the aspects of making the right commercial model, I think is critical. And the other thing I would say is, what do you think from a customer-centric and user-centric perspective? And I often say that, my identity, if it's not accepted everywhere, so for example, we use our passport because it's trusted to go through borders, to get into Davos, to get into the badge that is trusted. But at the same time, if it's not accepted everywhere, like MasterCard, if I have a payment card that's not accepted everywhere, it's not going to be much use. And having that aspects of acceptance, as well as sort of the trust and the identity, what else do you think are some of the things that we can do as a community to enable some of the both sides? That it's not just having an identity, but also the use of the identity. What are some of the ideas that any of you might have in terms of accelerating and getting people to work together more?
Same order.
Same order, or you guys can, up to you.
This is something that we think about a lot, even for our relatively narrow use case, which is how to structure the incentives so it is attractive for the three different personas that I talked about. We think that there's a part of the value proposition is to help businesses save money by reducing the processing costs for issuing credentials or for consuming credentials. Part of it is for speed, but we still have to convince an individual to trust this app that will contain these, blockchain protected credentials and use them. I think more broadly, we know that there still remains a pretty big digital divide, right? So there's some people who have no digital presence; they don't have network access, and this is not just outside developed countries and developed countries as well. And so figuring out how to, if you want to be able to make this ubiquitous, then you have to really solve the digital divide issue as well. Yeah.
Again, underlining the digital divide point, because I think a level playing field for everybody to participate in the digital economy is clearly one area that needs shared attention. I think the other is, perhaps we need more spaces to test some of the commercial models, collaboration models. The point I made earlier about moving from the concept of owning identity or data to leveraging the use of it, testing some of those in a safe environment. That's also creating those spaces is perhaps another area that would be useful.
I think it's less about technology, actually. It's more about commercial models, about what is socially acceptable. We are working on concepts where we are now connecting car rental, hotel, aviation, all together, but all not together. So in a trusted manner, how do you actually collaborate in such an ecosystem? And then I think in essence, technology can we can do quite something nowadays, but it's all about collaboration, and I think it's for me the big change will come when most participants will, let's say, change their focus from themselves to the ones they serve, and I think that will be a moment that we can actually change the paradigm on how we work with identity and how we leverage that in our for the good of society or for the business.
I think my panelists have said it well.
So before moving on to sort of the last bit or some of the questions, I mean, today, from my last count, and my team was telling me that today there are 77 plus digital identity type pilots, programs, projects, and the ones that we can find and the ones that we know about today. Just primarily this is in the travel or national ID sector. And that's just sort of in the last couple of weeks. Does it mean we all need 70 passports, 70 ID cards, 70 apps that talk about the same thing? If imagine, every doctor give me a new identity, or every government that I go, every retailer, wherever I go, how can industry, what would be your messages to the different sectors? Certainly, I don't think any one of us wants 75 passports or ID cards or digital identities. What do you think are some of the messages you would say to the industry to try and say, hey, work together? Sorry, I'm throwing out random questions.
It'll actually be interesting to see if that's the model, or whether the network effects will be so strong that once someone produces the right app and the right framework, whether that will just suck in. There will be Facebook. Does anyone remember MySpace? No. I mean, how many hundreds of millions of digital identities are there in the form of Facebook profiles? There are a lot, right? They're not very good digital identities, but they are digital identities, and because of the strong network effect. So I don't know if this will be as much in terms of conscious cooperation among the different participants as it will be that one solution will be just more technically elegant than the rest, or a handful will be more technically elegant than the rest, and end up capturing most of the market.
I mean, as we move into platforms and ecosystems, the world of platforms, ecosystems, I think collaboration is key, and figuring out your place in that ecosystem has to be top of mind for any business. And for me, identity is a key building block in that new model. Perhaps also thinking about, perhaps one of the reasons for why change is difficult is also that the transition can be overwhelming from where the legacy systems are to where we want to go. And so perhaps also spending more time on articulating what some of the questions there are. And those are shared questions for executives, companies across industries. And so having that collaboration and conversations would be a very useful thing to do.
Yes, well, actually, I think I've said what I needed to say before, and I agree with two others, yeah.
The only thing I'd add is maybe put a little bit of an emphasis on the point that Manju's making, I think. And that is, the word partnership, I think, can be overused. I also think the word identity can be overused, along with blockchain and AI. But, I think saying identity is like saying transportation. There's 100 transportation pilots. I mean, so I think it's really critical for us to break down what is the role in that ecosystem that each of us is playing. If you look at all of us on this panel, we would all say we're in the identity space firmly, but we all play incredibly different roles. One is a biometric capability, one is a interoperability player, one is a thought leader, another is sort of an issuer, if you will, of what we would call an issuer of identity. So I think that would be my takeaway, is that identity is not a thing. It's not a box of cereal. It's really an ecosystem of a very different set of players. And that the key to scaling is really figuring out the puzzle box, as I like to call it. So we're all puzzle pieces. What's the puzzle box and how do they all fit together?
I think Terry generated several great quotes that we can, reuse. Identity is not a box of cereal. And identity is not transport. It's like calling it transportation. Fantastic. Last question to all of you, and then we'll open up to the floor. So, in an ideal world, and you knew this one was coming, in an ideal world of unlimited budget, everyone working together, what would you do to make identity better? So, same order.
Thank you.
So, recognizing that what you just said is true, that we all focus on a different aspect of identity. I would, in addition to working on standards, I would find a way to skew the incentives to encourage rapid participation, much more rapid participation, by giving incentives that would change behavior.
Guess make it work for people. So staying people-centric, yeah.
I would say access for everybody to this digital identity, and then in the ideal world we would all get the services offered that we actually need. and optimize also as service providers who we offer these services to. So that would, I think, solve a lot of issues with also the spread of wealth in our society. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's simple. It's access for all.
Thank you to all our panelists. I think some of the great points that were making: access, commercial model, trust, technology is there, interoperability, standards, and I think some of those key points and ability to work collaboratively, user-centric, and ultimately, as you correctly say, access for all, and actually incentivizing different sectors to work together so it's simpler, it's easier for all of us to have better way of managing our identities and using our identities. So thank you to everyone. And now we're going to open it up for if there are any questions.
Sorry. Which one? This one? Nope. I'll borrow this one. So instead of opening up to questions, I think the value of let's get you into the floor and have the conversations and access to the bar. The people that have preferred access. But I want to extend the thank you. Massive thank you to all of you. I think one of the things to take away from it. Sorry. Thank you. Just in terms of who's on the panel, right, and the degree of engagement from giants in industry and the players. This is a key topic, and we need to continue this dialogue. Thank you for being here. Let's continue it over drinks, but more importantly, over the coming months and quarters, the ability to bring together major players to really try to drive to the right answers is critical. So thank you for being here. I will now subject you to the questions of the floor, and let's have some drinks and continue the conversation. Super. So thank you all.
Thank you.